Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. This week we are talking to PPA President and portrait photographer Mary Fisk Taylor about how she survived one of the toughest years for the photography industry. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Oh, look who it is. It is my photo friends. Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. We got a good one for you. I'm excited to share it. But before we do that, I want to give a big shout out to Aussie Shrimpy for leaving the podcast a 1-star iTunes review. Aussie says, pretty much waffle. Tried it, left it, didn't learn a thing. Two guys that waffle on and never really drill down on anything a beginner can do to improve their photography. A constant lineup of quote-unquote guests who self-promote but again give no insight on how to be a better photographer. Seems focused on the quote-unquote look at me by hosts and guests alike who impart quote-unquote business tips and ultimately encourage people who are just starting out to believe that they are much better than they actually are and to quote-unquote sell their quote-unquote talents. The hosts live in a world where quote-unquote everybody gets a trophy, but that's not the reality of any profession. The Facebook group is a great example of constant positivity that in no way helps people progress, as all its members, quote-unquote, like and drool over very average photos instead of helping by providing real, relevant feedback. Feels like the hosts are just chasing Facebook and Snapchat followers, believing that this is how we should measure our success. Well, Aussie Shrimpy, I am sorry that you did not pick up any helpful information within the podcast or within the Facebook group, but I don't know about you, but I personally enjoy the, in your own words, constant positivity that we promote into the podcast community for a few reasons. You know, everybody's skill level, it's kind of laid out, right? There's a roadmap. We start as a beginner, we become more intermediate, and then we get advanced. When somebody is advanced, the way that they progress as a photographer is that, they already know the basics. So they're going to drill down and find every little thing that they can improve upon and then go deep into that to get to that next stage. Those who are intermediates know the basics of photography. They can go out, possibly shoot in manual. Maybe they're working on their compositions. And they also need feedback on their photos, right? How you can improve. We focus on what are the aspects that obviously you did good, but also what are some of those aspects that maybe they missed the mark on and next time they go out and shoot can improve upon. But for beginners, those who are brand new to photography, I think that it is much better to focus on the great things that they are doing rather than the poor things that they are doing, because it's the great things that they are doing that get them excited about photography. It's the great things that they are doing that is going to continue to push them forward as a photographer, because when you enjoy something that you're doing, especially something like a hobby perhaps, getting the encouragement of others and hearing, as you said, constant positivity really makes you feel good inside and want to share more. And we all know that the best way to grow your skills as a photographer is to actually just get out and shoot. So by promoting that constant positivity, you're creating a feedback loop that makes them feel good. And then they go out and then they shoot more. And then they come back and they share those photos. And then that constant positivity makes them feel good. So then they go out and then they shoot more until they get to that intermediate stage. And then now is when we start to focus on things like how composition could be better, how maybe a focus point could be better, how a lighting choice could be changed to be better. Because that, I believe, is the best way to grow as a photographer. In the same way that I would never tell my 4-year-old daughter that her picture of a tree is garbage because, well, there's no branches, and why are we looking at it straight on? Why aren't we looking at it from the ground or up high? Because that is more of an intermediate or an advanced technique. But today, I want to make her feel good for actually creating something, for producing something, and then feeling confident enough in that work that she did to share it with me. And while constant positivity isn't something that you are looking for, I'm assuming that you're probably more advanced than a beginner photographer. I appreciate your insight and I appreciate what it is that you shared with me and with the group itself. So, if you're new to photography and you like positivity and you like the photos that you are taking, but you're still looking for ways to grow as a photographer, I want to invite you into the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community and find out for yourself. Our moderator, Kim, and I work very hard to ensure that the community and the atmosphere within the Facebook group is a very kind, or as Ozzy Shrimpy said, filled with constant positivity, so that you can come in and feel safe to share those photos and get honest feedback. So again, you can find the group by searching Facebook for Beginner Photography Podcast, and I look forward to having you. Now with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's episode. This week we are talking with return guest, which I'm very excited about, Mary Fisk Taylor, about how her studio dealt with the past year, which was probably the most challenging time for photographers in business. Now, Mary also shares her insight as she is the president of the PPA. Now, if you're new to photography and you're unaware, the PPA is the Association of Professional Photographers of America. It's been around for more than 100 years and is truly a great organization. So again, really valuable insight from Mary today that I know that you're going to get a ton of out of this interview. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into this interview with Mary Fisk Taylor. Last time you were on was episode 196, and we talked about kind of sifting through the noise of being a photographer, being in business. So for listeners who maybe are new during this last year, can you remind us how you got into photography in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So crazy. I accidentally ended up here. So I swear by that. But I had another career and I was getting married and I hired this awesome wedding photographer and had a great experience with my bridal portraits. And then when my husband and I had our daughter, she's 25. So 26 years ago, I looked him up and he had just opened his own studio and I started bringing Alexandra there, and I had taken the leave for my job. And I was really battling on whether I would go back to my full-time corporate career or not, because it was a lot of hours and a lot of work and I didn't have any flexibility, all these things that I thought maybe working in a small business would give me, which is a joke, by the way. But I ended up helping out Jamie Hayes, who had a small studio here in Richmond, Virginia, back in 95. And then I started working with him just a few days a week. And then next thing you know, here I am 26 years later, still doing this.
When you reached out to Jamie, first of all, I chatted with Jamie not too long ago when I had to call and reschedule this interview last time. And he was just like the nicest person I think I've ever talked to on the phone. He was so great. But when you first reached out to him and you're like, hey, I got this crazy idea here. Was that in the capacity of like, I want the camera, I also want to shoot, or how did that go?
No, I was actually in a sales session with him. We were at Alexandra's 6-month portrait session, and I'm like, hey, so where are those 3-month portraits? And he looked at me and he looked like just a sad little puppy. And he's like, I opened this business. I had no idea. I'm so behind. Do you know anybody who would like to maybe work part-time? And I went, me. And I didn't mean to say it, but really honest with you, I was really struggling being a stay-at-home mom. Mm-hmm. And that's something I felt so guilty about and wouldn't have admitted for many, many years. I'm fine with it now. I think people need to hear that it's okay to struggle with that, by the way, dads and moms both. So he said, oh, wow. And so I just started, back then, of course, we were film, right? So I'd crop card negatives and put together proof books and albums. Back the old day, the art leather, the albums you would put together with the mats and the images and file and stuff. And then I started doing sales, and he's like, oh, just take over the sales because you're great at sales. And I went to my first event, my first Imaging USA, and I saw all these ribbons and necklaces that people were wearing. And I'm like, what's that? And I like shiny new things, and I'm a level upper for sure. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. So I started working, shooting at weddings. And then next thing you know, I built my own client base, etc. So no, he did not. He just wanted somebody to just do production is where I started.
That is too funny. So when you finally did pick up the camera, you're like, I like those medals. I want some of those medals.
And I started entering image competition, and I started doing all that stuff. And I always loved photography, by the way. I didn't realize it. Jamie's the one who said, Mary, I come to your house, you have pictures everywhere. I had a 35 millimeter camera and I always took pictures. I was yearbook photographer, all the things, but I never thought I was an artist or a
Mm,
photographer. And I still struggle with that, to be very honest with you. I still struggle with that word artist. But I do love creating with a camera. I also love selling and marketing. I love all of it. The business is where I'm obviously stronger. Jamie's
sure.
such an amazing photographer, but I do love it. And I love the joy of delivering those goods to people and knowing they're going to bring them so much joy and longevity and a visual history of their family and things. So
I love that. I can hear it in your voice that you love it as well.
do.
Uh, with the I'm always so interested in this aspect because I think especially for today's photographers where photography is so readily available with our cell phones and whatnot. And My mom, I always remember, carried around the point and shoot 35 millimeter camera,
Yeah.
and she always got photos. But that transition from I'm just going to take snapshots to I'm going to take photos with intention is an entirely different mindset. So for you as a photographer, from the photography, I guess, aspect of it, what was probably the most challenging part for you to uh, getting in there to be able to capture those images?
I think for me, and I don't know, I hope I'm answering your question. I think from the get go, it was really hard for me to understand that what I took with the camera was a sellable product. That
Mm,
was a mindset I struck as much of a business person as I've always been, and all the thing. I mean, all the things. I think for me to think that what I created with the camera was sellable and people would buy was huge, and that was a mind shift that I had to work through. And I'll never forget one of the second wedding I ever worked. I was the second photographer and I was photographing black and white, 35 millimeter, kind of around the bend and around the sides and that type of stuff. And the couple came in and they fell in love with one of my images and they bought back then a 20 by 24 decollage,
wow.
which was a big product for us. It was an expensive product. It was one of our high end products. I mean, they spent back, we're talking about 96, 97. They spent like 27 or $2,800 on it.
My goodness.
And that was the day that I went, oh my gosh, like everything came together for me at that moment. It was just,
Hmm.
they loved it. And then I thought, so you get that feather in your hat, right? And then the next sale and the next. So that was the piece that I struggled with in the beginning, was that what I was creating was not just fun snapshots or whatever, that it was actually sellable art or sellable work that people wanted to display in their homes. So the good news is that I was already a client, so I already believed in the value and I already believed in the investment, because Jamie, when he opened the studio 27 years ago, I mean, we were charging back then, he was charging $125 for an 8 by 10. So that
Oh
was,
yeah.
what I mean? That was a long, now granted, it was film and it was different and you actually could charge more back then in a lot of respects. But I was already investing in it. So I already got that part. That wasn't hard for me because I was a client first. But the fact that people bought what I did but I'll never forget that couple. I'll never forget the image. I can't remember what I photographed yesterday, but I remember that like it was seconds ago.
Of course, of course. Why do you think so many people, even like yourself, struggle to kind of overcome that mindset of, oh, I'm not just taking a snapshot. This is something that others see a lot of value in.
Comparison.
Mm,
I mean, they don't say comparison is the thief of joy for no reason. I do think that, especially our industry, and because we're such a visual world right now, you're online, you're seeing your competitors, your neighbors, other people's work here and there, and we're always comparing ourselves to other people. I wish that newer photographers or people coming in or people that are in and been in for decades would stop and just put the blinders on. I mean, I think we talked about that last time about sifting through the noise. Put those blinders on and pick your lane and just stick with it. I go out of my way to not compare my work to others because it
mm,
doesn't matter. The only thing I need to worry about is my phone ringing, or is my inbox full? Is my schedule full? Are people buying? Is my bank account have money in it? If that's good, then I don't need to worry about what is going on out there, because all I need to worry about is here. And I think that takes an incredible amount of discipline that a lot of us don't have, because especially the ones that are really leaning into being. Jamie struggles with this more than me because he's very much an artist and he's always looking and comparing and checking. And I'm like, you can't. It doesn't matter. Look at us. We're hitting our goals. We're meeting our average sale. Our schedule's full. That's what we need to worry about. Or it's not. Let's worry about this. Let's not worry about what XYZ did down the street. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
I think I'm similar to Jamie in that same sense of it's like I always want to do better. I always want to take a better photo. I always want to, but I think because photography is so subjective, it's hard to quantify what's a good image and what's a great image, especially after
100%.
you've been doing it for a long time. So sometimes it feels like when you see something that's just a little bit new, maybe that you wouldn't have photographed, it seems like it's groundbreaking. Like
Oh
this is
yeah.
something entirely different. So I'm right there with Jamie. That's a struggle right there.
Yeah.
But
It's hard.
I know today you're heavily involved with the PPA. Can you tell us about your history with the PPA and
Mhm.
what your role is today?
Yeah, well, yeah, great. So I have been a member of PPA since 1998. And I joined my state affiliate and PPA the same time. I believe in both of those organizations. My state is my fellowship and my, where I kind of cut my teeth, and some of the stuff I still teach and certainly practice my business today. I learned at my very first little guild meeting I went to in Virginia. PPA was huge for me because it's where I met my mentors that have given me so much. So I've always been incredibly loyal, and I love image competition. So I got involved with that very early on. So that kept me involved and engaged. And then, years go by and I got asked to serve on different committees or groups and things and just volunteer. I got very involved several years ago with when we had a charitable arm, when we had PPA charities. And so from there, I got asked to be on the board of directors. And so here I am, almost at the end of my tenure with that. I guess this is my ninth year on the board, and I should know that, and I just can't even think. I guess it's been about eight
You've been
years.
busy.
Two,
Yeah,
four,
it's
six,
hard to
seven,
keep
eight.
track.
Yeah, 8 years, and I'm currently the president of PPA, which has been an honor, and no one's more surprised than me. Trust me. So I'm president this year, and then next year I'll be the chair, and then I'll be done with the board. But this year I get to travel around and talk and share with lots of different little small groups and affiliates. There's places where I started, which has been just amazing. I'm so relieved and grateful that I get to travel because, of course, we didn't do any of that last year
Of course.
with the year we had. Looking forward to hopefully having an in-person Imaging USA in 2022, January. That's our plan. We're moving forward and being very hopeful that that's going to all happen. And so I get to just do all that cool stuff. So it's been really awesome, to
Oh
say the
man,
least.
I can't imagine. The experiences that you have, and I'm sure talking with the photographers that you have as well. And I think I said this before we started recording, but I don't think that there's anybody who probably has a better thumb on the industry as a whole as you. You're definitely right there at the top. So today, one thing that I know is on the mind of a lot of photographers is, or at least from last year, was like, what do we do in this situation?
Yeah.
When the world kind of shuts down, how do you move forward? And I think with a lot of new photographers, it's very difficult because you're just getting started, and to feel like you have the rug ripped out from under you. I mean, that can. I know a lot of photographers who almost gave up on photography because
Mhm.
it's like, what's the point there? And especially when we're being pushed in this side hustle type world, when I don't think a lot of people truly do want that. So from your perspective, um, how did your own photography businesses change? What happened to them, and what happened to the industry as a whole there in the beginning?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I don't want to I want to be forward thinking, but I'll just give a little brief, history. Obviously, I have two studios. My main studio is my portrait studio. We still do some weddings. And that's the one I started with Jamie. I do have a second studio with my mom and sister, which is a volume studio. Last year, that was pretty much shut down. There just was
Mm,
not a lot of, schools weren't in, so there weren't school
sure.
pictures and all that stuff. So that's a whole nother beast, right? And that was okay. Our portrait studio, obviously our weddings were done. We did not have, our weddings were just rescheduled or what have you. You know, that means this year's busier than I want to be with weddings and events, but I'm grateful to have the business. What I realized immediately when we shut down, and in Virginia, we were shut down as non-essential for 3 months. So we
Hmm.
were shut down longer than a lot of other, not everywhere, but we were one of the longer ones shut down than other states because our governor is a doctor and he took a very scientific approach to it. So that was okay. I realized very quickly that I scrapped my entire marketing plan, which I was so proud. I had all, done for the year. I'm a planner in that respect. So I realized I needed to find passive income. So um, I do a lot of consulting and coaching with studios, but I knew that was not going to be a good fit because people weren't working, they weren't making money, and I couldn't imagine trying to go out and sell my coaching to people who weren't in business. That just felt like I was like, that just felt like I was being very deaf to the environment. So I leaned in really hard to things we could still do at home as photographers. And so we worked really hard on promoting restorations and we have a wall concierge service that we offer our clients. We've always offered those services, but it's not one that was very forward in my marketing. It was kind of one of those things like if a client was asked, it was like, sure, we do that. So I was able to stay somewhat busy by doing restorations and by leaning into the concierge service, which by the way is just a service we offer where we will go through all of your either snapshots, negatives, digital files, call them together, organize them for you digitally, and then create like a curated wall, maybe a grow.
Wow.
Some people call it a grow wall, whatever. So I had a lot of those jobs coming in because a lot of my clients were still working. So they were still making money. They're not like me, right? They're not sitting there and can't make money. They're still
Of
making
course.
money.
Yeah.
And they didn't have anywhere to spend their money. And that's what I knew. My biggest competition is vacation or, but they couldn't spend money.
Hmm.
So they had money to spend. So I was ramping up for that. So I stayed pretty busy with that, scrapped all my marketing, only marketed restorations and the concierge service. So I was busy for those months. When I knew we were going to reopen, it was very important to me that offer as frictionless as a system as possible. I just wanted to make our clients feel safe. I wanted to be safe. And because at this point, we're talking about early summer when we finally reopened, what we did was we went completely frictionless with consultations and sales. And so the only time we were in person was for the photography session itself,
Hmm.
which the majority of those at that time of year for us are environmental because we have a garden in our studio. So it was that we would get online, we would do our consultation, they would walk around their home, we would look at images, we would talk about investment. I curated an entire little box of samples, little tiny canvases, leather samples, little painted canvases because we sell mostly paintings, so that when we were doing the consultation and the sales session, they could still hold and feel and see my products.
Oh, wow.
Granted, on a very miniature scale,
Sure. Of course. Yeah.
but I curated these really beautiful little boxes. It had a lookbook in it, and we had little wrapped snacks and hot teas and coffee, just little things to just try to make it as personal as possible, just as if they were in my studio. I actually my daughter made all these little fresh baked cookie candles because one of the things we're known for is we bake cookies every day so they could light the candle and smell the cookies. And so I tried to bring that
Genius.
experience to their home.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So the cool thing that happened is we ended up having our best year ever,
Mm.
mostly because I didn't have any competition. I did not have vacations. They weren't going on holiday. They weren't there. They can't supply chain. You can't even get new furniture. Interior decorators
Sure.
weren't redesigning the kitchen. Everything was shut down. So there was a lot of money left on the table that I could come in and scoop up. I think because we came up with such a great system that really did help. Because if you had asked me a couple years ago, oh, just do your sales online, I would have told you that'll never work. They need to be in the camp. They need to be there. They need to see the products. They need to do it. Worked. It worked
Hmm.
very well, by the way. So the good news that came out of that for me was that I realized I could now offer this system to my clients, and I was no longer requiring them to take 3 different trips to my studio, that they could choose to just come one time, be photographed, and I was happy to do online, or virtual
Sure.
selling and consultations. So that worked really well, and it's something that we've carried over into this year. Even though
Wow.
we're open, we offer it because there's always the mom that's like, I got to get to soccer and pick the kids up, or I'm
Hmm.
in traffic, or dad's got stuck out of town, or they're coming in from 30, 40, 50 miles away, and I'm asking them to make that trip 3 times. Nobody has time for that, right?
Hmm.
So some of my clients still choose to come in and do it all in person, which is great, but we've shifted to a lot online, which quite frankly and selfishly has worked out great for me this year because my travel schedule is so hectic with being president that I was in Colorado Springs the other day and I hopped online and did a Zoom call and I had a nice high 5-figure sale online in Colorado. You know what I mean? Just
That's
as long as I
amazing.
can be in person to take the pictures. So that all worked really well for me. I'm very fortunate that we had a brand that supported it. I'm very fortunate that I had the training and wherewithal to make it work, and it did. So coming out of COVID has not been, you know, it's not been as hard on maybe our studio, but I'm seeing it across the industry that it has been. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of this happens a lot. I didn't have a great year, now I'm suffering, and so now we're fire saling things, we're discounting, we're trying to just get business in the door, which, as all of us know, if we really think about it, that's never a good thing, because what happens is, it just takes, it doesn't fix anything, right? It
Of
doesn't
course.
fix it in the long run. Discounts never work down the road, for small businesses like ours. So that's how we went through COVID, and that's how we've come out of COVID with a new sales and with a new sales system that, quite frankly, has been really, really awesome. And I think is relevant to the times. It's better on the environment. If people aren't out in their cars, all the time. There's a lot of reasons why I think it's a good system. So it forced us to do something that I think is going to be an incredibly promising thing for us moving forward.
Sure. Of course, it's always been one of the things that I hear from photographers. And I'll be honest, I mean, myself included several years ago, which was I hear the power of having some sort of in person consultation.
Yeah.
But, where do we have these things if you don't have a studio space? Can you just do it at a Starbucks or whatever?
Yeah.
But this idea of just doing it online, and I did my first one this last year as well, and
Uh-huh.
it turned out fantastic. Just being able to chat with them online, it worked great. So now going forward, being able to do this, do you think that it's because we just went through the year that we had that people are just now normalized to doing
Yeah.
things online and that's why it's working for you? Or do you think
I
that it's
think
been this way the whole
yeah,
time?
I think it normalized Zoom. It made Zoom a requirement now. Not everybody used to have a computer or, internet or a cell phone. Or now everybody has Zoom, right? It's forced
Right,
us to
right.
all have Zoom or something, relevant to Zoom. So yeah, when I have an 82-year-old grandmother hopping online and hopping on a Zoom call and having not a problem at all getting on there, that tells you how incredibly useful it is. And I do think that that's one of the things that's a positive that's coming out of COVID for us. Because it's nice, it's nice that you can, still have a business without, being present in your business all the time. And, for me, it's just been great this year because, again, my travel schedule is insane and I was a little bit concerned, but boy, this has made it, I don't worry. I mean,
Yeah.
can schedule a Zoom call anytime, and make it work. So that definitely has been a positive thing.
For those who are listening to you and like, that's it, I'm sold, like I can do this. What's maybe like one or two tips that you have just for them to get started and feel comfortable with this?
Yeah. So, the thing is, and this is something when Jamie and I went digital back in 1998, when we first bought our first digital camera, one of the things we promised ourselves when we went from film to digital is we weren't going to change the way we did things. Meaning, just because we were using a different instrument, a different tool, a different media, didn't mean that we would change our process. What I mean by that is, back then, what that meant to us was we weren't going to start learning to retouch. We weren't going to do our own printing. We weren't going to do all the things that a lot of digital photographers thought was so awesome about being digital. I still am using a professional lab. I'm still outsourcing my artwork. I'm still doing all those things, even though I could do it myself. I've always valued my time at a higher rate than what I could probably pay somebody else to do it. So if I could pay a retoucher or the lab to do it for this, then I just put that in my costs, and I spend my time visioning my company, selling, marketing, networking, right?
Hmm.
Same thing with Zoom. Just because it's something new and different doesn't mean we needed to throw out all the planning and all the solid sales plans we had for so many years. So that's why it was very important to me that we still were doing the consultation and looking at the images of the spaces in the home. Why I put together, and it's not cheap to put together that box. I have about $17 in that box. So my sale has to work, right?
Yes.
But I know my photography, I know my sales plan, that yeah, that $17 is an expense, but I know that if I can't put that little tiny oil portrait in their hand or the little leathers, or if I can't do that, they can't feel and they can't see it. So I had to do that. Um, as well. And then I also still stuck with, I've always used Pro Select, or I have for since it was came around. So I still use Pro Select. I'm still putting the images on the client's wall. I'm still getting the room views. I'm still treating it as if we're in person.
Mhm.
I'm serving them coffee and cookies, just they're just arriving by courier and not
Yeah.
in my space. So I wanted to keep as much of the integrity of the in person as possible.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of times we go, oh, it's online, so it's fine. You can be late, it's fine, or you can blow it off, or it doesn't have. No, it needed to still feel as rich and amazing. So when I'm on a Zoom call with a client, I'm in a quiet space. I've got portraits behind me. The dogs aren't going to bark, which they might today, by the way, because I'm at home. The phone's not ringing. I want them to have that same beautiful experience as if they were in my space. And I think a lot of times we think, oh, technology makes it easier. Yes, it does, but that doesn't mean we should sacrifice the experience.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That is such a good takeaway right there. Anybody listening needs to go back and listen to that one more time. It's so easy to, when you want to try something new, to completely try to reinvent the entire wheel
Yep.
and get it to work. And I will admit that I am very guilty of that. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that insight right there. With the PPA, obviously, you're geared towards professional photographers, So this past year, there probably wasn't a lot of discussions as far as, street photography and the art of photography. But what was kind of the PPA's line to best help guide and assist photographers through challenging times where you really couldn't get people in front of your camera?
Well, I can tell you for a fact that PPA and on being on the board and having a proverbial seat at the table, so to speak, in the room where it happens, if you want to go into Hamilton here. But the thing is that we immediately hopped online and started talking about what we could do for photographers. PPA is an organization for photographers, run by photographers, with nothing but what we can do for photographers in mind. So our goal at PPA is to number one is to be fiscally responsible. So we make sure that PPA has enough money put aside that if we didn't bring in a dime for 3 years, we could survive and offer every single benefit that every single member has been given, right? That's number one, is to be fiscally responsible with the money. Beyond that, it's what we can do for photographers. So I don't know if you're aware, but PPA, first of all, this year, our insurance, which is already included in your membership, all you have to do is opt in. And here's a little word to the wise: if you're a PPA member, please go to your PPA my profile page and make sure you've opted in to the insurance, because legally we cannot opt you in for the free insurance. You have to
Oh,
opt
wow.
yourself in. There's no cost, but you do have to check the box, right? So beyond that, our benefits in that just went up 10 times. Now you can either get full replacement value for, I think, a $350 or $350 deductible. Do not quote me on that. I'm terrible with numbers. Or you can get it repaired for a $50 deductible. I literally shopped around here in my area and I could not find anybody close to that. So for my dues, I get that insurance alone is what I'd be paying if I was paying for my insurance here.
Yeah.
So we worried about that. We had to shift to make sure Imaging USA was safe. So we spent an incredible amount of money and a big investment to have the best online event we could possibly have.
And it was,
Um,
by the way. I want to say that. It
Thank you. I
was. Yeah.
agree. They did an amazing job. PPA has the best staff and leadership in the world. For a trade association, it's so beyond that. But everything we did and talked about was what for the members. And even going into this year, I mean, I don't know, Imaging USA in January, we kept that the registration is only $59. We're subsidizing 50 nights and $50 a night for each hotel room. And guys, the hotel's not giving us any of that. We'll be writing them a check for all of that money because PPA survived COVID very well. As a matter of fact, we have more members than we've ever had. We broke 31,000 members earlier in the spring or the summer. And, we wanted to give back. So we created a give back to our vendors who've been so great to the association. And we made sure we could make Imaging USA as economical as possible, so as many people as possible could attend. So everything we do is about members. We amped up our education. We opened the whole platform. You didn't even have to be a member to get
Yeah.
online and study with PPA during COVID, which I thought was amazing. We wanted to make sure everybody had that, and we kept our voice on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, strong. Even though we couldn't be there in person, we made sure we were still advocating for modernization of the Copyright Office and copyright reform. So we just kept on business as usual, just doing it a little bit different. And I'm really proud of this association, and I'm incredibly proud to be a very small part of it.
Well, I think you should be. I mean, I haven't really um, been, I guess, in the PPA for any sort of long history, but it feels like just in the past few years that there has been the type of changes that are forward-thinking changes, and not just how do we, that I feel like that change from film to digital was very much
Yeah.
focused on the technology, and it was
Hmm.
very scary, I think, for a lot of photographers. Whereas today, we're kind of back at it, right?
Oh,
Back to work,
100%.
we're doing it, and it's time to figure out how are we going to make the future the best that it can be. And again, I think from everything that I've seen come out of the PPA, it feels like that's at the forefront, which is great. Now, I got a question for you in particular, which is that you are a story brand expert, which is very exciting. I would love to know, I guess, first of all, for listeners, can you let us know what story brand is? But then also, because of this past year, has your story changed?
Yeah. So yes. So Donald Miller wrote an amazing book called Story Brand, and people get a little bit confused what Story Brand even is. But story, if you read the book or listen to his podcast, the whole point of Story Brand is talking. It's a framework of how to run your business. And the bottom line about Story Brand is your business telling a story or inviting people into a story loop that is relevant to them. And what we know is human beings are born with two instinct attributes. We are born to survive and thrive, right? So if I'm sitting here and that book starts falling off the shelf behind me, I know to just get out of the way. I don't even have to
Yes.
think about it. You're going to get out of the way. You touch something that's hot, you move your hand. Survive and thrive. Like going back to cavemen, you know what I mean? Dinosaurs coming, run. Whatever it is. The other is to conserve calories. And what I mean by that is not actually food calories, but our brain. So have you ever been watching TV or driving and you see a billboard or a magazine ad, anything like that, and you start looking at it and you're like, what are they selling? What are
Yes.
they selling? I have no idea what they're selling. Well, what happens to us as human beings is if we can't figure it out, we shut down and move on. Unless we're being forced to. Now in school, we're forced to figure it out or whatever. But you have like 3.5 seconds to catch someone's attention or stop the scroll if we're online. So you need to be quick and you need to be clear and concise. And that's what StoryBrand talks about. And it walks us through an entire framework of being clear and concise and having a very clear message, making sure that we're not talking about ourselves too much. Nobody likes the jackhole at the cocktail party that's just always running their mouth talking about themselves. We all have that like signal, hey, if John catches me, I'm going to do this and rescue me, because you don't want to be stuck with that guy. If you don't know that guy, you might be that guy, so you better check. No, just kidding. But making their client the hero and making sure they understand exactly what it is you want them to buy by agitating a pain point they may or may not know they have, by the way, and how you can solve it. So my story brand hasn't changed because my story brand is incredibly the same regardless. As a matter of fact, it amplified it. It turned the volume up on it because we went through a year. Oh, I mean, I was getting emotional. We went through a year of people dying everywhere. You know what I mean? You just couldn't get away from death. So nothing brings you back to center, which for me is my family. And for the client I want to serve is family, by the way, more than that. 9/11 was another time in our history of owning the studio that brought it home really hard.
Mm.
This was 10 times 9/11. It was 100 times 9/11. It was global. So families were clinging to each other, right? Well, my pain point is, that you get 18 summers before your family changes forever. Those kiddos fly away, the landscape changes. Don't miss a moment. I can freeze time. I could capture this moment. I can't stop it, but I can make sure you don't look back and wish you had captured it.
Wow.
So I leaned into that harder than ever, and I will continue to, by the way. But if anything, for me, the pandemic it made it so much more, oh wow. And people weren't as busy, so people were paying attention to my marketing more than ever. And it's getting busier again, and we're getting right back to where we were. So I'm back on the hamster wheel trying to get the message out, but it helped my messaging, and it should have helped all of our messaging. And we've been saying this is the year of the family portrait. Year of the family portrait, by the way, every year is the year of the family portrait. But really, all of our marketing really went into that. Like, we just, if anything, if we've learned anything, time is precious. Don't let another moment pass, because you're not promised tomorrow. So that's the verbiage that I'm using, and that's what StoryBrand is for me. Now, if I owned a company that made microphones, my StoryBrand would be different. But my StoryBrand is time is the pain point, and I can't stop it, but I can capture it.
That's so much more eloquently put, I think, than, because I think every new photographer is going to say something of like, I love capturing little moments or whatever. But until you do put that weight behind it, that you only got 18 summers. I mean,
Yeah,
that right
18
there
summers,
is like,
18 holidays. Well, and I love what you just said, because it's exactly what I love this. Well, nobody cares what you love, by the way, because it's not about you, by the way. It's about them. Anytime we put I into it, we are literally taking ourselves and making ourselves a hero. Nobody wants that. We're too busy. Our job is to guide. We're Yoda. We're the Yoda of this movie, if we want to call it that. And that's what Donald Miller always calls it. He loves to refer to movies. He's a big movie fan. But we're the Yoda. We're just the guide. We're going to sit back in the background, and we're going to let you be the hero. I always make the mom or the dad front and center, because good for you for making this decision. Good for you for doing this for your family. This is all about you. You made this decision. Isn't it important, that you do this, and does that your family deserve it? That's what we need to be saying. Nobody cares what you love to do. I mean, that sounds mean, but they don't. People say about time, yeah. Oh, wow, I bet you're so leveraged because you're PPA president and you want to. No, my clients don't even know. They don't care. They're just trying to get to soccer and pay the bills and get their kids' haircut and get them. They're not worried about what Mary Fisk Taylor is doing. That's for Mary Fisk Taylor. When I'm representing my studio, it's all about them. It's not about me.
I think that's why you're the expert there. That's perfect. That is wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. Becoming a StoryBrand guide, and then working with Profit First and becoming a Profit First professional were turning points in my career. Were major turning points in my career. And those are things that have saved our business in a lot of ways. I don't know if it made it, you know what it does? It helps me not work as hard. Because I have a clearer path to my financials with Profit First, and I have a clearer path to my marketing and the way I run my business with StoryBrand. It just means I don't have to work as hard.
Yeah. And who doesn't want that?
We all want that.
We all want that. Yeah.
We all want that.
So there you go. If you're listening, pick up StoryBrand and Profit First.
Profit First.
Those are, Profit Great First books. Is one of those I can also attest to as well. That's a wonderful one.
Oh, so good.
I know that there's still several places in the world where people are very much locked down. They are not, allowed to leave the house. They can't go out. They can't shoot or anything. If they are in a professional capacity, is this the time that they, read StoryBrand? Is this the time that they go through Profit First and just start working on the business rather than focusing on getting people in front of the camera right now?
Yeah. When you can't work in your business, you need to be working on your business. Right. Mm-hmm. And then that's exactly what, I know that's what, I talked about a lot last year. I was able to, I have a podcast as well. So Kira and I talked about it a lot on our podcast. And then I got to partner with Ronan Ryle with 3XM Solutions. And we were doing a lot of think tanks and weekly conversations. And that was an overarching theme. And honestly, it's one that shouldn't take a pandemic to make that happen. But I think it forced people to really work on their website or really read a book and go open those bank accounts and start Profit First, because they couldn't. I know the money wasn't coming in, and that is hard. And guys, we were all there, by the way, and it is so hard. But having those things already in place saved my business. So I do know that a lot of photographers that did spend their time last year working on that, setting up the bank accounts and doing that, that this unfortunate second round that we're now seeing, they're like, wow, it's so much easier right now because I actually have profit. I have money in the bank because of Profit First, or
Right.
my site's working, or I implemented that passive income resource. So I'm not out photographing as much, but I'm doing more restorations, or I'm doing this or that. So I do think that was has been an incredibly helpful piece.
Sure. Of course. Of course. I know that we're coming to the end of our time here,
Yeah.
but let me ask, with a show like the Beginner Photography Podcast, there's a lot of photographers who are, they love photography as a hobby and they're looking to the future, maybe someday starting a business.
Yeah.
What advice would you give them to maybe kind of work on now so that when that time comes to start that business, to get that going, they're just set up for the most success that they can have?
Okay. So I already mentioned those two books, and I 100%, if I do when in coaching or consulting, I do, which I work with a lot of great studios across the world right now. But I tell you what, starting with Profit First in mind and starting with Story Brand is a lot easier than, being an old dog and learning new tricks, which was totally me, right?
Sure.
But the first book I would recommend them reading, or at least finding a resource, is, and I'll mention the book, but I'll tell you why, is there's a book by Dr. Carol Dweck called Mindset. It was originally written for teachers and those in education, but it's grown into so much more. And Mindset was introduced to me in a point in my life where I was at a really low, coming off one of the best years I've ever had, but waking up in January and feeling like I can't get out of bed because I just didn't know if I could start over because I was working so hard. We start a business because we think we're going to have this financial freedom and flexibility and get to do what we love. And I guess 1 out of 3 isn't bad,
Right.
but the financial freedom part and the flexibility are really hard to come by. So Mindset for me was so important because it really taught me that I needed to work hard on a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. So a lot of times I see this in our industry, people say, well, I can't do that. I'm not this, not in my town. I'm not you. I'm not that good yet. One day. Well, that's a very fixed mindset. So if you're going to go out and do this, which is a beautiful thing to do, owning a business is a beautiful thing, but it shouldn't be at the cost of your mental health, your personal relationships. You start hating the art itself when it becomes that hard. So please make sure you're in the right mind space to believe in yourself and to trust yourself and to not compare yourself, to get over perfectionism and know that done is better than perfect, because at least it's done. You know what I mean? Done is good. So I'd rather it be bad than unfinished, so
Yes.
our
Yes.
industry is really guilty of that. They'll just put it aside because it's not perfect. Well, you're the one that's judging that. Your client's going to love it. So the mindset piece for me, and my answer may have been different through the years, but at this point in my career, 26 years in, it's mindset. If your mind is not there that you're going to overcome that stuff, then just wait until it is, because you really have to be in a growth mindset to, in my opinion, to find the true success in this industry. And without it, I think it's a lot harder. And most people don't make it because of it.
Yeah. I'm currently putting something aside because it's not perfect. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go ahead and read this book. I'm going to go ahead and go on Amazon. I'm going to buy it and read it. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm going to put the links in the show notes as well. But
Yeah.
Mary, as always, it is fantastic to talk to you today. Just the amount of wisdom and just real life experience that you have, that you're able to share with listeners is a very valuable thing. And I don't take that lightly, and I don't think that the listeners do as well. So again, I want to say thank you so much. And before I let you go, can you let listeners know where they can find out more about you online?
Yeah, awesome. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I love being on your podcast. I love your podcast, and I love the fact that you have identified the client you want to serve, which is the beginner photographer, and that is so needed. So thank you for doing what you do as well, Raymond. It's really important. But yeah, so maryfisktaylor.com is my website for me personally, and then I do have a podcast with Kira Derryberry called Get Your Shoot Together. So after you listen to this one, maybe you check out mine, but that's where you can get more Mary Fisk Taylor. So thanks again for having me.
It is a hoot for sure. It is so much fun just to hear you guys talk to each other, just the
I
banter
know.
that you guys have back and forth. It is so much fun. It's not just like, here's photography, here's how this works, I mean, it really feels like you guys are best friends, and we're just in the room, so that's always a joy. So, but again, Mary, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing everything that you did. I look forward to keeping up with you in the future and seeing what the future has planned for you as well.
Well, maybe I'll see you at Imaging USA.
I plan on it. Absolutely.
I love
we'll
it.
Make
You
it
better
happen.
come up and say hi.
We'll make it
and
happen.
anybody who's listening, make sure you say hi. I can't wait to see everybody and give everybody a big fist bump in Washington, D.C.
It's always so great to be able to hear. Well, let me just say that I love talking to Mary for several reasons. One, obviously, her insight, being in the position that she is just absolutely fantastic for her to be able to come on here and share it with you. But also, I think very rarely do you get to talk to somebody who is so naturally articulate and well-spoken, and just really, when you combine that with her position and her ability to share information about the whole industry for photographers, is really a treat. And I truly did enjoy it, and I'm sure that you did as well. My biggest takeaway from this interview with Mary was, man, I loved her idea of the concierge service. Being able to get a, as families, I'm sure that you know this now, as a photographer, you're going to look at your family, you're going to look at your friends, and you're going to see that they just have collections of photos, and there's not any sort of organization. It's just, here's the photos. So for her to be able to take her trained eye and combine that with these photos of other people, right, that they take either with their cell phone or their camera, or that they get taken, and then put that in some sort of mural on a wall that says, like, this is us, this is who we are, this is us at our most real moments, this is us as humans, and this is us as a family, I think was such a great idea. And something that, honestly, I mean, I don't think that I ever would have thought of, and that is why Mary is who Mary is. Now, while I don't think that that's a service that I will implement into my business, that's not a service that I think that my couples are looking for, at least not at the moment. It was great to hear just how Mary's brain works, and how just thinking out of the box a little bit can really change up your whole business and save your business in times of dire need. And oftentimes there are issues that come up even in my business, and I just try to think, like, what is the solution here? And I think one of my weaknesses is being able to think out of the box. I'm very much like, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here type of person. And I admire that a lot about Mary. That's a very cool idea, and it definitely worked, and that's how she got to where she is today. So I would love to hear your biggest takeaway from this interview with Mary Fisk Taylor within the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community. How does that sound? Feel free to share it in there. Again, I'd love to hear it. Let's have a discussion about it, because it's something that, we all struggle with, coming up with those new ideas. So again, I would love to hear that from you in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook community. But that is it for this week. Until next week, I want you to get out. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to be kind to others. And I want you to stay safe. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.